And then if it's appropriate, but you're doing community outreach, you may start to put up frameworks that suggest things around inclusion, marginalization, oppression, etc. And maybe, you know, if you listen to what they're saying, you're just basically underlining and emphasizing what they're saying. Because probably if they're talking about what problems they're having in the community, they might not be naming it as oppression, for example. They're not naming it as like being the other, but they'll probably use language and they'll have things that they'll say that go along with that kind of experience. And you say, that's it right there. You're talking about a way that your group has been ignored. You're talking about a way where your group has been put down. You're talking about a way your group has been judged. Yeah? And now I'm hearing it. You've experienced it for so long, you see yourself the same way. Yeah? But then it could be a process where you see, but is that where you want to leave it? Or do you think there's a possible way to address community life so that your group actually gets more equal position in the larger community? Because maybe they say it's hopeless. There's too much racism. There's too much sexism. There's too much classism. It'll never happen. And you say, I completely understand that you think there's no hope. How can I help you? Or maybe they think, well, I don't have much hope, but do you have a suggestion? And then maybe you have a suggestion how to address these things within your organization, for example. Yeah? One of my favorites. So here's one of the main things, one of the two main interventions that I really love is the public open forum. So let's say you're working with this group within your organization. You realize, are you in Santa Rosa?
No, I'm in San Jose.
San Jose, okay. So maybe you realize that this is actually an issue that the whole city needs to address. And maybe with different partners, you start to organize a public forum in San Jose on the issue of X. How maybe a certain group has been marginalized for decades. Yeah? And you get different stakeholders involved, you get different groups involved, and you get people that don't necessarily agree with you. Yeah? Yeah? So one of the great things that's also challenging when you have a public open forum, let's say, for example, on the issue of racism, I've done some public open forums on race, is to get people who are really want to confront racism, really want to dismantle and change racism, but you also try to get some people who are a little bit racist. Yeah? Because what it does is, because if you don't, here's another part of dreamland. Another kind of role that's really common in group and community processes and families, etc., is the ghost role. And especially in liberal circles, it's really politically incorrect to say that you have any racist tendencies, sexist tendencies, homophobic tendencies, ageist tendencies, etc. So it stays a little bit like a ghost. So you're talking about racism, but no one's saying, well, that's me a little bit. But as a facilitator, it might be right for you to say, well, actually, I think most of us are not completely neutral when it comes to gender, race, sexual orientation, etc., etc. Yeah? That most of us have a part. We're more comfortable with certain kinds of people and less comfortable with other kinds of people. And so maybe it gives a little bit more room for this part to come out. So case in point, I was teaching at the school, CIIS, a couple years ago, and I was using my male privilege to really silence one of the female students. She had a strong idea, and I said no. It was really harsh, and I was stressed, whatever. But it was clearly an expression of my male privilege and power. Yeah? And she and other classmates were really pissed off at me, rightfully so. But it wasn't going away. It's like 1 week, 2 weeks, 3 weeks later, the atmosphere was still in the grips of that one moment. So finally I said, I think we have to go back to this moment, and I want to name a role that I was expressing, which is a male oppressive role. Let's explore it. We explored it for maybe 45 minutes. One part that says, I'm male, I feel like I should be the one who has the power and the say, and that's the way it should be. And then the other role that was oppressed by this, impacted by this, got to say, well, the heck with you. That's really, it makes me so mad and it's so hurtful and I want to just put you down, right? We went back and forth on this. We even switched roles. It was a 45-minute process, which is nothing. And you know what? The environment completely changed. Yeah? It was amazing. It was like the most meaningful teaching moment of the whole semester. I learned something really big, and the students did too. But it took kind of entering into some of these roles. So I think, as facilitators, can you hold the different roles, including some of the roles that are, you know, kind of unsavory? Yeah? So one idea with some of these like community issues is to think about holding to consider holding public open forums. And there's a great book by my teacher Arnold Mindell. It's called, I really recommend this book. It's a guide to how to organize and facilitate an open forum. Really recommend it. If there's an issue that you're really concerned about in the community, you want to address it in the community, consider organizing and facilitating open forum. It's a fantastic way to bring in different points of view, encourage dialogue, and see if you can get people to connect across differences. It's a great thing. I did one a few years ago around the issues of physical danger, police, and youth in the city of Richmond. We had the mayor came out, police, youth activists, different nonprofits, and it was a great dialogue. One of the things that boiled down to was one of the youth activists had a really sharp interaction with one of the police. And it was a great thing. We just stayed there for a little bit, you know, where the police, they had a really earnest, sincere desire to help out, but the youth was really holding his ground and saying, you know, you can't just show up like this as you are like this, you know. We need to know who you are. You're not going to come in your uniform, etc. I mean, it was this amazing, unusual dialogue. It was like the heart of it. You can actually see it on YouTube. You go to Open Forum Youth Richmond, you could see it. It was filmed. It was an awesome moment. And then I invited people to connect to somebody that they didn't know. And then people who would normally not talk to each other were talking about this issue of physical violence, not feeling safe, the presence of the police, etc., etc. It was amazing. People were like, wow. People were talking in this really amazing way about this issue. So that's one thing I wanted to really just name is public open forums. Any comments or questions about holding a public open forum? Yes?
It seems like you really want to address those assumptions and those things in the subconscious that have formed over time with yourself.
As a facilitator, as a
Well,
community
no,
member?
if we get into that second realm of dreamland,
Mm-hmm.
that we're to take into account, it's just not our intellect saying, recording what our five senses are saying as consensus reality.
Yeah.
We're dealing also with people that have a past,
Mm-hmm.
including myself.
Yes.
So we have those influences and we're being more conscious of those other influences.
Yeah. Yes.
And so,
Yes.
and also not to be afraid to bring those underground influences up to the top, because that's healthy. That's the
Well,
way we're
to
going
not be
do it.
afraid, that would be great, but also I think it's really natural to be afraid of them, and because things can blow up, but sometimes things blow up, but if you can stay with them, you can process the explosions. Yeah. I mean, I think it's a big thing what you're talking about, and I love what you're talking about, because in this dreaming realm, you're thinking about, for example, diversity, you're thinking about these different experiences, these different feelings, these ways that we project upon others. there's so much there. There's so much to learn from. But in this dreaming realm, this middle zone, there's also the possibility where things can become more fluid. Where in consensus reality, you are you and I am me. Would you agree? In consensus reality. But the dreaming level, maybe I discover in a little bit of time with you that I'm also a little bit like you. Oh, I didn't know that. Maybe a little bit different, but it's to some degree, I'm a little bit like you. And maybe you learn that in some way, you're a little bit like me. And that's some of the possibility of the dreaming realm. Yes?
Yeah, what's becoming apparent to me is that this is a real personal interaction thing.
It could be personal.
And what brought this to mind is what the woman from San Jose was mentioning earlier, because in Marin, I'm from San Rafael, the Marin city, it's, well, historically it's been mostly black, but a lot of people of color there.
Yeah.
They've been fighting for a long time to get the space improved, but now they've got to the point that they've got the political powers ready to improve it, but in such a way that they're going to lose their space. That the people who live there now are going to be able to stay there, that they'll move down.
Wow.
So there's a lot of knowing what my impression is and what my condition, and not wanting to change it because of that, because you don't know what worst place you might go to. So it might not happen in a room like this, you know.
Or it might.
Yeah, I mean, I guess I take a kind of political active, vision to what you're trying to say and
Yeah.
trying to interpret it.
Right. Well, it's also just trying to understand the scenario you described. That also sounds like a complex scenario.
Oh,
A
yeah.
certain positive change was starting to happen, but it looks like it starts to backfire and actually be worse for the people.
Yeah.
That suggests that more activism, more of a fight needs to happen.
Yeah.
Yeah, thanks for that. So I want to make one distinction. So a really important level of the other is this. Within a certain social context, like a larger societal context, there's a group that has become or deemed or targeted as the other. Yeah? And in this country, that has been true for reasons of gender, race, sexual orientation, age, ability, etc., etc. Yeah? Yeah? It's just been true. Marginalized, deprived of certain rights, etc., etc. It's a really important level of looking at the other. Okay. The second level that I want to describe is a kind of a more informal way where anyone can be the other within a given context. You could be the most privileged mainstream person, but then let's say you go home to visit your family, and all of a sudden you are the other again. Yeah, for example. Yeah. Or maybe you belong to a group that has been chronically marginalized in this country, but maybe in another context, you are the mainstream one for some reason. And you may be the one, maybe, who otherizes another person within that subgroup. So the second kind of other thing, it's more of an informal way of looking at the other, and it's more associated with this dreaming realm. But again, one of the potential benefits of looking at this other level of being the other is that it can give anyone the experience. It's like, oh yeah, I too know what it's like to be the other. Let me see how I can use that experience to help with my team, my family, community, etc. Maybe a way to gain more understanding or empathy, etc. Okay? It's kind of like this. It's like, if you look at racism, for example, I think it's a really clear way to look at it to say that it's people of color in this country are the ones who are bearing the brunt of racism. However, anyone can be and experience racial prejudice. That's a different thing. Okay? Do you see that distinction? So I just think it's an important one to make. Boy, it's really gotten warm in here.
I missed that. Will you repeat that?
Yeah. So sometimes people say, well, for example, let's say I'm not a person of color. Let's say I'm a white person who says, Well, I too have been the subject of racism. Well, arguably no. Arguably, white people have been the subject of racial prejudice. I think it's important to distinguish, and this is arguable. Not everyone agrees about this, but I want to take a stand here and say that, no, actually, in this context that I know, which is the US, it's people of color who have been the main target and who bear the main brunt of racism. You follow that? You might not agree, but that's just what I want to say. I want to make that distinction because I think it's an important one. Because there you find, for example, the weight of history. You find measurable ways where, for example, people of color suffer lesser health, greater barriers to accessing social resources, worse treatment in the criminal justice system and by police, et cetera, et cetera. It's measurable.